Greetings to everyone attending today, and thank you to the Journalists and Writers Foundation for inviting me to speak. I'm speaking to you as Chair of the Board of PMNCH, the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health, which is the world's largest network focused on advocacy for the health and well-being of women, children and adolescents. Wherever violent conflict occurs, women and girls are in peril. The numbers of people impacted by such violent conflicts have grown rapidly over the past decade, and the incidence of sexual and gender-based violence has grown with that. The war in Ukraine is the latest of many deadly conflicts, where rape and other sexual and gender-based violence are used as weapons of war. Unfortunately, still, under 1% of humanitarian aid addresses sexual and gender-based violence. Such violence is often underreported, and so the data which is available is unreliable, and attackers tend to go unpunished. Access to healthcare facilities by those who have suffered such attacks may be very difficult. And where facilities do exist, they may lack awareness of how to respond to the suffering of victims. In Mali, for example, a country experiencing significant armed conflict, half of all healthcare centres are said to have no post-rape kits available which could support victims. And that makes recovery from the trauma and impacts of rape more difficult. The scourge of sexual and gender-based violence is widespread even in places not racked by armed conflict. It's estimated that worldwide, 1 in every 3 women between the ages of 15 and 49 has experienced sexual and gender-based violence, a truly shocking statistic. But violent conflict makes women and girls even more vulnerable. In Liberia, in a survey done after the country's civil war had ended, of 1,600 women interviewed, 92% reported having experienced sexual violence, including rape, during the war. The outbreak of war and conflict contributes to a breakdown of the social, economic and justice infrastructure, and not least of policing and court systems. The search for basic supplies like food, water and medicine can be extremely dangerous for women and girls. The routine protection for women and girls from being in neighbourhoods they're familiar with people around who know them, is lost where there's displacement and conflict. Women journalists, parliamentarians and human rights defenders are at particular risk, facing even greater danger than other women, as well as facing greater risks than men engaged in the same activities. All such threats are a constraint on women's participation and leadership, and that's an incredible loss. For example, when women participate in the making of a peace agreement, research evidence suggests that it is 35% more likely to last at least 15 years. We need the voices of women and girls in these processes. Above all, we need action, globally and nationally, to see that women and girls are not exposed to sexual and gender-based violence, and to ensure that those who are its victims get access to all the services they need to recover from their ordeal. It's vital to work in partnership with those who best understand these issues, and they are first and foremost the women who've experienced such attacks. PMNCH has the prevention of sexual and gender-based violence high on its advocacy agenda. Too often, this violence is a hidden or largely ignored consequence of conflict and is not openly addressed in many societies. The challenges of overcoming it need much more visibility and political attention. PMNCH believes there must be a survivor-centred multi-agency and cross-border approach to tackling sexual and gender-based violence. And we say that forging partnerships for action and having highly visible champions matters a lot. When we come together, we can do great things. And it was so encouraging to see this year's G7 leaders communique condemning sexual and gender-based violence. And while we're on the subject of partnership, PMNCH is so thrilled that President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa has announced that he will lead a global leaders network supported by PMNCH to advocate for women, children and adolescents. On the issues of sexual and gender-based violence, PMNCH highlights 3 priorities for action now. The first, every country must condemn all sexual and gender-based violence, including violence against women journalists, parliamentarians, and human rights defenders. There have been 2 UN Security Council resolutions which have urged states to condemn and prevent violence and intimidation against women leaders and peace builders, and against civil society generally. Second, states must integrate addressing sexual and gender-based violence and comprehensive sexual and reproductive health and rights more broadly into health services and humanitarian responses. And this must be a standard part of humanitarian response plans, rather than depending on the number of reported sexual and gender-based violence cases. The World Health Organization has a very good toolkit on how this can be done in humanitarian settings. And third, states must ensure that healthcare workers have the training and support they need to respond to the health needs, physical and mental, of women, children and adolescents who have suffered sexual and gender-based violence. This work is often both distressing and grueling. To conclude, so much more priority must be given both to addressing sexual and gender-based violence across the board and to addressing the needs of those who survive it. As we strive for universal health coverage, let us ensure that the services needed to support survivors are regarded as essential services and always available. And let us strive harder to support the world's peace builders and mediators to prevent the outbreak of violent conflicts and thereby support a rollback of the scourge of sexual and gender-based violence which women and girls are experiencing in our troubled world. Thank you.